Hasn't run in a long time. Check it over, see if it's worth fixing.
Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag.
21 years old.
Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 261 chainsaw. If you didn't hear me there, I just said it was 21 years old. The customer complaint is that it hasn't run in a while. Take a look at it, see if it's worth fixing. Sometimes when I hear customers say this, what they really mean is come up with an excuse for me to not fix it so I can buy a new one. And other times they're just genuine about wanting to repair the saw at a reasonable cost. So either way, we're just going to give them an honest diagnosis and run through it. So we took a look at the chain brake and the rim drive. Here we're looking at the air filter. We're just checking the physical condition of the saw to see if there's any major components that would add big bucks to the repair cost. I don't have a lot of 261 parts laying around, so depending on what the part was, it might be difficult to replace it, or at least costly. So as with all repairs, I want to look in the cylinder and see if this is even a worthwhile effort. If it's scored, we can just walk away from it. For a 21-year-old saw, if the guy wants to fix it for nostalgic reasons, that's fine. But it's usually more cost effective not to have me fix it. Now if you're doing it on your own, that's a different story. But you're not charging yourself the same labor rates I'm charging these people.
Stop.
So there's lesson number one. You should waft the fumes toward your nose and not just dig in and take a sniff. So the next step is going to be to fish the fuel line out of the tank. Take a look at the filter, take a look at the line, and we will pressure test the fuel line. I don't like to go above 10 psi when I'm testing these, and if you look at the needle on the gauge, you can see that as soon as I let off the pump, the needle's dropping again. So once we determine that the fuel line isn't holding pressure, we have to determine if it's actually the fuel line or if it's the carburetor. So the next step is to dig in a little bit deeper and get to the end of that fuel line, plug it, and then do our pressure test again. Now this isn't specific to a 261 or even Husqvarna. Any chainsaw, weed whacker, whatever, if you're going to pressure test the fuel line, it could be the carburetor that's the problem. So here you see I have a plug I keep on the bench, and we'll test it again and see what happens. Not the greatest video, but it's the same thing. The needle won't hold. So we know that the fuel line is bad. So I'm going to move forward with the repair, and I pulled the starter off of it and cleaned that all out real good. And then I checked the air gap on our ignition module, set that, blew out some other debris that was going on in here. We're going to gap a spark plug and torque it down to spec. So because of the 21-year age and the guy telling us that it hasn't run in a while and everything else looking pretty decent, we're just going to go ahead and rebuild the carburetor on this one. Carb removal is pretty straightforward on these. And every time I pull a carb off, I take a look down the throat and see if the intake side of the piston looks decent. there goes our old fuel line. And if you look real close, you can probably see that it's cracked right there. That ain't no good. Still pliable, but it's got a crack in it. We got our new carb kit. And we'll go ahead and open the carburetor up and take a look at the metering diaphragm. Not as stiff as most. I mean, I should say not as stiff as I've seen, but still, it was bad enough. The saw wouldn't have run right. So we run the carburetor through the ultrasonic cleaner. I don't always do that, but you know, if I know something's been sitting for a while, I usually will. The next step is going to be to snake a new fuel line in here. This is a genuine Husqvarna fuel line. We just push it down into the tank far enough to grab it with the end of our needle nose and pull it through. So stick around to the end of this video. We're going to do a little bit of carb tuning, or talk a little bit about carb tuning. With our new filter in place, we'll go ahead and put the rebuilt carburetor back on the saw with a fresh gasket. Get her bolted in, get our linkage put together. And then we'll go ahead and start it up. Got some special sauce in it. Might as well check the bar oil too. Because even if it runs here, eventually I'll take it out to a log and tune the top end. So I'll let the fun begin. Having a little bit of a problem getting this thing started.
Well, come on now.
Come on now, that ain't even bullshit. That's horseshit.
Listen to that bog on the bottom end. Well, I'm trying to get the screwdriver in there and richen up the bottom end, and here I'm bringing up the idle speed. And I was having a problem actually getting the screwdriver in there decent. So that's why I've got this cover off, so I could take a look inside there, and I got it to a point where it would start. So now that it's running, let's take a look at the tach and keep an eye on the screwdriver. So the first thing I did was open it up. I richened it. I turned it to the left, and the speed went down. So that tells me that I'm on the rich side of that balance point between too lean and too rich. Right there, you saw that I was closing the jet and the speed was coming down. Now I'm opening the jet and it's coming back up to that 3600 peak. And now I'm going to open the jet a little bit farther, and we're going to drop it down a couple hundred RPM, which is usually about the right spot. That balance between too rich but it'll still start running idle cold. And that's kind of a key when people come to pick up a saw or it's weed whacker or whatever it is. And they start it cold and it dies because they didn't let it warm up for 30 seconds. They don't think it's right. So most things leave our shop a little bit rich. There's a little bit of a bog on the bottom end. You see I'm back on the low speed jet. I opened it up and the idle came down, but the response came up. If it'll sit there and idle all day long like that, I'm fine with it, as long as it doesn't load up. So that's all I got for you today on the 261 tune-up and a little bit of carb tuning talk. Thanks for watching. Later.